Well, hey guys, welcome to the Next Man Up podcast. I am your host, Mark Stanifer, and I'm honored to be with you for another episode. And back once again, joining me once again is my partner, John Gregory. Hey, John.
Hey.
Good to see you
Hey,
again.
Mark, you know what's exciting about today?
What is exciting about today, John?
Well, it's technically the second day, but it's opening day of the baseball season.
Ooh, this gets your juices flowing. I know this.
So actually, my team played yesterday. They're not playing today. So living in the moment of baseball heaven.
So your team is the Cards.
Yes, it is.
They made a big off-season sign just recently, bringing Sir Pujols back, right? Like that's a big deal.
It is. And yesterday I didn't get to see the game, but I can only imagine opening day in St. Louis this year with Yachty, Wainwright, Pujols all back together, and the potential of what this year means. It's for baseball fans, this is the weekend.
So if we were texting, your response would probably be to me SMH when I say I grew up playing baseball. I spent the majority of my pre-20 years playing baseball, and I've told you this before. I just really, I don't engage in professional baseball until around mid-September when the playoff comes.
And thus, God has brought me in your life.
to keep me grounded. You are my baseball evangelist.
You're welcome.
Well, that was extemporaneous today.
Yes.
Which is fantastic. You never know what you're going to get. Even when you think you know what you're going to get.
That's right.
Okay, so I want to tell at least one, maybe two stories as a setup for what we're going to be talking about today.
Okay.
And I want to go all the way back into my toddler and elementary years as a boy growing up. Mm-hmm. Do you remember the Hot Wheels cars, the Hot Wheels brand cars? Did you ever have the orange plastic Hot Wheels track that those cars ran on?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was like a 1/4 inch thick. It was pliable and flexible, but it was pretty sturdy. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how my parents figured out that would be a good instrument for discipline.
I can tell you that one.
I grew up in a home where the spare the rod, spoil the child proverb was literally interpreted. And the rod for me at a young age, and my brother, was a piece of Hot Wheels track. And oh, dude, did that stuff sting. It stings. In fact, we still, as a family, when we get together, rake my mom over the coals a bit because she's an easy target just because of her wiring. Yeah. And my brother and I will get going. Remember that Hot Wheels track? Mom, do you still have a piece of that Hot Wheels track in the closet? Like, dude, I had a healthy fear for the Hot Wheels track, not as a toy, but as an instrument for discipline. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I remember is when our behavior warranted Dad getting involved, and it was during a work day. Prior to him getting home, we would be sent to our bedroom, and I didn't know this until later, and I appreciate the theatrics as a father myself. But we could hear him coming down the hall. He would exaggerate his footfalls, and he always wore a thick leather belt. And he would rip the belt out of his pant loops in a way that was very noisy. Like you could hear it go as it came out of the pant loops. And then he would fold it in half and snap it. Now, at the time, it for him, it instilled the response he was going for in his boys.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I didn't know how much theatrics there was to it. Like he used the belt for sure. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But he exaggerated the belt for effect. But
Wow.
like this is when I go back to my childhood and I think about discipline
Mm-hmm.
and obedience, I think about the consequences of not obeying
Mm-hmm.
and the two instruments, the thick belt and the Hot Wheels track. And I don't remember specific behavioral incidences, but I remember very strongly the feeling of, oh, this is going to hurt. Oh, here comes the Hot Wheel, or Dad's home. It's about to get real.
Hmm. Wow. Well, we didn't have, well, we had the Hot Wheels track. It wasn't used for that purpose that you're describing. My mother was a disciplinarian. I don't really recall our dad doing the spanking and whipping. He chose other more psychological options, but my mother grabbed a fly swatter.
Mm.
That was her weapon of choice.
So similar to me, you grew up in a home
Oh
where
yeah.
that physical punishment, the
Mm-hmm.
spanking, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
was part of
Yes.
it. I accepted that it was consequences for my disobedience, and it just, I mean, I didn't know any better until I became a parent, right, and started
Mm-hmm.
making the decisions. But there's another story that comes to mind, and I think I was in my early teens, I think. And I don't remember the circumstance, although I remember being on my back, like working under a car. But that doesn't seem quite right. Maybe I was working on my bike or something. But I remember laying on my back in the driveway, working on something above me, just kind of not paying attention to anything else other than what I was doing. And my dad came out and asked where my brother was, or what was wrong with my brother. And my response was something to the effect of, I don't know what his problem is. He's across the street, but he's really PO'd.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember saying PO'd, like the letter P, the letter O, but I didn't, honestly, John, I didn't know what it stood for back then.
Oh.
I
Oh.
knew the context and the right application, but I didn't know what it stood for. And my dad lit into me.
Mm-hmm.
And I even today, I remember thinking, I remember feeling really hurt by that because I
Mm-hmm.
didn't know what I did wrong. And I'm a rule follower. I'm the kid that, and even today, like I'm the guy that wants to get it right and play color within the lines and play by the rules. I didn't know what I did wrong, and I was getting really accosted. And I don't think he pulled out the belt. I was kind of beyond that age. But I remember just feeling hurt. Like, I don't know what I did. You're on my case. Like, what just happened here? It's like I got blindsided.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I don't remember how it was resolved. I'm sure it was resolved, or I let it go. Or I know at some point he explained what that meant. And I found out, like, oh, okay, that's off limits. I won't say that again.
Mm-hmm.
But I just
Mm-hmm.
remember being hurt in the moment by his response to my action. And as I was thinking about this story and thinking about this episode, I was taken back to not just what happened, but how I was feeling about it. And even now, feeling like something in the moment, like the relationship in that moment was wounded or
Mm-hmm.
hindered because of the tension that was there. Does that make sense? Without having been in the story, do you understand where I'm going?
Oh, I could. Well, had that happened in my family, it probably would have happened with my mother, but just as a disciplinarian again. Oh, I could see her having the exact same reaction uh, from what I'm envisioning here as your dad did. And, here we are 40 years later, um, different lens to look through. But I could see some suggestions and questions to ask, to the parent that has that kind of response, uh, to help avoid that child. Well, even if it does happen, let's just go there. Let's say that happens, and what do you look for in your child when it feels like they look at you like, what's going on?
Right, right.
And to have some awareness that there's something going on here in my kid's head and heart, that I need to hit the pause button here for a second.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a good segue transition into specifically what we're getting at today is a phraseology, if you will, that I've come to use in my own life and in my own parenting over the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years or so. And that is shifting from focusing on obedience from my kids to focusing on pursuing their heart and pursuing the relationship. And the stories that I shared, I think really they're evidence of what shaped me as I became a parent and became a father to eventually 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. But I would say like the first, if you were to break my parenting up, well, think of it like acts, like in a play or in a musical, you've got act 1 and act 2.
Yeah.
I can think of my parenting journey, my fathering journey, sort of like act 1 is this focused on obedience, and act 2 is really focused on relationship and pursuing their heart. And there's a lot that went into that transition. The intermission period was pretty fruitful for me, and I think Act 2 has been much better. But Act 1 was really influenced by my upbringing and what I saw at home, and then the father that I became, because I was in many ways modeling. Not modeling. It was this type of parenting was modeled to me, and so by default, that's kind of what I grew into.
So would you say that in Act 1, you were coming in and out of your own awareness of here's the model, but I'm not sure I want to follow it?
It's a fantastic question. I was aware, I would say, of a couple of things. I was aware when I was really angry or frustrated that there was disobedience rather than obedience. I was also aware early on with my first child that I didn't like the spanking thing. It didn't seem to be working, and it's like that tool was a hammer in search of a nail, but my son wasn't a nail. He was something else and required a different tool. And so, largely speaking, those were the 2 things I was aware of. But I don't know, other than realizing that, with respect to spanking specifically, I was taught that as a kid and defaulted into that as a parent. Other than that, I would say my awareness in Act 1 was pretty minimal. Other than when I didn't get the obedience that I wanted and the emotional reaction that I was having as a result of that.
So all you knew was I'm a hammer, but I'm not sure what else to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about when did I feel the strongest frustration or anger around disobedience, and it was largely when there were other people around. In a church context where the kids aren't paying attention, or in the restaurant where I'm the guy in the middle of the restaurant and my kids are making all kinds of noise. Or there's a story that gets told frequently in family gatherings about one evening when my mother-in-law was staying with us for a visit, and an exchange that my oldest and I had from he's up in his room at the top of the stairs and I'm down at the bottom of the stairs. We're both yelling at each other. Like I realized today that I was insecure when I didn't, when my kids were disobeying and there were other people around, because in reality, I perceived it as a reflection of who I was,
Sure.
like an identity marker. And it because whether people were thinking what I thought they were thinking or not, I was insecure, and I was giving into an emotional response because I believed that if I could get their obedience, then fill in the blank, whatever it is, circumstances are going to be good, relationship is going to be good, I'm going to feel good about myself, fill in the blank, whatever it is. But it was all conditioned on their obedience.
I know we said this, I think, in another recording, but wouldn't it be nice to have a video and you could look back at you and your son screaming at each other from, opposite ends of the video of the stairs there, and just, okay, what do I see? What was going on there?
Yeah.
If somebody could show you that the next day,
right? Like real time learning
a whole lot sooner.
Right.
Which is what we're hoping to do here, right?
That's
sort of
right.
Shine a light on Act 1.
That's right. So at some point in my journey, and this there's a parallel to my spiritual journey as well that has positively impacted me as a parent. But at some point in my journey, I had an intermission period. And during that intermission period, it occurred to me, and it probably wasn't just my my organic, natural thinking. I'm sure it occurred to me because of other work that I was doing and growth that was happening from others as they were pouring into me. It occurred to me that if I pursue a relationship with my kids and I win there, if I pursue their hearts and I win there, then obedience isn't as important, but also becomes a natural outgrowth of the relationship. Let me say it this way. I realized that I could have obedience and not have the relationship.
Oh, yeah.
But if I had the relationship, I could also have the obedience for their benefit, not for my security as a person or as a father, but for their benefit, because it's an outgrowth of the trust and the depth of the relationship that drives their behavior. Another way to say it is Act 1 was really a fear-based approach to parenting, and Act 2 is a love-based approach to parenting. And they're night and day, man. They're just night and day different.
Well, and not to go down this deep theological thing, because I'm not deep, period. But when Jesus said, when you read John 3 and everybody goes to verse 16, we know what that verse says. I don't think we hear verse 17 often enough, because he says, I didn't come to condemn you. I feel like in an Act 1 type of environment, for the parent and the son there's a lot of condemning going on.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
In your own brain about yourself as a parent, in that kid's life. I mean, there's a lot of condemnation going on there. Well, Jesus said, I didn't come to bring that. So if I'm living in that, maybe this is getting a little deep, but if I'm living in that kind of relationship with God, well, that's just going to play out in all of my relationships. If that is who I believe excuse me, if that is what I believe my relationship with God is all about, just keeping rules, well, that's just going to play out in all of my whole life. So to me, your illustration is you're right. It parallels, parenting can parallel your understanding of who you are as a child of God.
I think you're right on. And that's certainly been my experience. My guess is I'm not the only one, but I will talk for
No,
first person here
sure.
because this is my experience and my story. I remember thinking, again, using the metaphor of a theatrical performance, during the intermission, I remember thinking this fear-based, obedience-based approach is really how I perceive Father God is parenting me.
Mm-hmm.
But that's inconsistent with what the text says.
Correct.
The text says it's much more loving, and he's much more loving and relationship focused and engaged. And so it's like, okay, what could that look like in my parenting? What if I fathered my kids the way God
Mm-hmm.
fathers me? Well, like, shoot, that's a big question, because then I got to really understand how God is fathering me. And then, of course, I can't live up to that perfectly, but I can move more in that direction. And, there are negative consequences to our decisions when we move away from what God wants. And when we're parenting our kids, especially when they're younger, it is important to put boundaries and provide discipline and to be more actively engaged in leading and guiding them for their sake, because they don't know any better. But that doesn't mean you can't still pursue them and pursue
Mm-hmm.
their hearts and their relationships much more so than pursuing just their obedience.
Yeah, so I'm going to go back to your imagery of you and Jacob at the stairs.
Yeah.
So my imagery there to depict what God may have done, because this is what Jesus did. Jesus came down.
Mm.
So how might the story have been different had you climbed the steps and had a more heart-to-heart conversation at the top of the steps?
It's a fantastic question. And it's one that I was actually envisioning as I
Mm-hmm.
was thinking about that story. And like, let me back it up just a
Mm-hmm.
bit. What if I was okay with some tension in the relationship and a little bit
Mm-hmm.
of questioning my authority with my mother-in-law looking on? What if I could get to the place where it's not about my performance? Like, my kids' choices are not indicative of my value as a father. Well, then in that situation, I might wander up the stairs and say, "Hey, buddy, what is it that you want? I hear what you're saying, but what is it that you want?" And he was probably 3 or 4 at the time. So, right, like, you can't really argue
Right.
with crazy.
Right.
um, but I might be more willing, as you say, to come down to
Mm-hmm.
him and
Right.
engage him in a conversation about what he wants and what would be helpful, and maybe what I want in the moment, and how we can get there, rather than just reacting. And dude, it's become such a fun story to laugh at, because my
Oh, sure.
mother-in-law clearly remembers. I don't think my oldest remembers, but the 3 adults at the time certainly remember. And it's all turned out well. But in that moment, I do climb the stairs and get down on his level and
Right.
engage him and figure out what's really going on. And then we go from there.
So in a sense, video did get taken. It's just in the other three adults' brain, and they'd like to tell you about it, right?
Well,
Like,
yes, yeah, and I'm secure at this point where I can laugh
mm-hmm.
about it as well. I think that will be one of those stories that repeats in the family for years to come.
Sure, sure.
But there's also like there's so many things. I won't take us further down the path, but there's so many
Right.
other nuggets to pull out of that story, given what we were saying to each other, the actual yelling match that we were having. I think if I could suggest a few things here, like how do you begin to move in this direction, right? Like what is the if you are more like I was in Act One,
Hmm. Yeah.
how do you create this intermission period so that you can move into Act Two in a better way? And I think the first thing that comes to mind is like leading from a place of love.
Hmm.
And okay, we're supposed to do that as parents, as part of the job description. Yes, yes, yes. But that doesn't mean we always do. And so what does a loving response look like in the moment?
Hmm.
And if we can lead from a place of love, loving the person, loving who they are, loving into them to foster the relationship, well, then that love is an antidote to fear. And the fear response that we give, and maybe the fear that we're creating in them in order to obey us, like that's not love. That's more of that condemnation type of
Right.
approach versus let me love you. And so like there's lots of different ways and ways to contextualize that, but if you start from a place of love, then I think things are more likely to progress well and relationship focused rather than starting from a place of fear.
Hmm. Yeah, and I'm just thinking, reality is it's hard to love someone 24/7, even your own kids, right?
It's hard to feel it for sure. Yes,
Yeah, 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 yeah. The actual feeling of it, and if the feeling is supposed to lead your parenting, there's going to be times you're going to screw up,
that's right.
and that's okay. Uh, how do we, as fathers, how do we manage those emotions? What do we do in those moments when those emotions are out of kilter from how I really want to parent my child right now?
Yep. Yeah. So again, here we come back to hey guys, you have emotions too. They do
Hmm.
drive your behaviors. So the
Yep.
more you can recognize that you are having an emotional moment, the more you can regulate that versus ignore, stuff, bury, pretend, and then choose how you want to be in that moment.
Yep.
So it's like recognizing when the emotional volume gets turned up and even taking a self timeout, right? Like I
That's right.
am not going to administer any discipline in this moment because I'm angry. And it's okay to be angry, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
James tells us that. It's
Yes.
okay to be angry, but don't respond out of that anger because then it's not really a loving response in that moment. It's more of an anger response.
Hmm.
So yes, like it's a great point, John. Like, what do you do in those moments when you're angry? Well, just give yourself a timeout and separate yourself from the moment, and then come back into it. I think one of the other things that has helped us is to decide on consequences, impacts, the discipline. I'm trying to resist using the word punishment here,
Yeah. Okay.
but to decide ahead of time. Even if it's just you and your spouse, especially when your kids are younger, but as your kids get older, just communicate to them, hey, when this
Hmm.
happens, this is going to be our response. So the decision is made ahead of time. The emotion is removed from the situation because you've already made the decision. And then it's just administering the consequence, taking the phone away or taking the keys away or grounding them from the party on the weekend, whatever it is. If you've made the decision ahead of time, then it removes the temptation to respond emotionally in the moment, and it honors them in the process when you communicate. Like, these are the values. I'm kind of expanding the conversation here, but these are the values that we have as a family. And when you go against the values, these are the consequences. And just know that going in, right? So it empowers the kid to be able to know, like, if I choose disobedience, then I'm choosing this consequence as well. And it takes some of the emotion out of it in the moment. And I'm not saying all emotion is gone. It's highly contextual here, but there are ways to decide ahead of time and to have a plan. Like, anticipate that it's going to happen, have a plan, implement the plan, and then also be flexible in the moment to revise and adjust as needed.
Well, you're illustrating a clear principle, several clear principles actually, of boundaries.
That's right.
Just setting boundaries. And that's good for you, and that's good for your son.
That's right. That's right. That's a good, simpler way to say it. And the more you can communicate those boundaries on the front end, the more they know when they're going to bump into those boundaries and what happens, all in the context of, I am pursuing you as a person, as my son. I want the relationship before I want your obedience. It's a love-based versus a fear-based approach. This takes a bit of humility, right? So guys, stare at yourself in the mirror and realize that you've made mistakes. I've made mistakes. It's part of the deal. There's learning in the mistake-making process. That when you could acknowledge that, give yourself some grace, put on a sense of humility here, then you can move forward and grow from this. And here's the question that I would ask you. Where in your relationship with your son or with your other kids have you placed the emphasis of obedience over the emphasis on pursuing their heart and relationship? I don't know where that is for you. I don't know what your context is, but if you can examine the man in the mirror and you can sit in this question, albeit perhaps a discomfort-producing question, where have you pursued obedience over their heart? Then my guess is this could be an intermission moment for you and an inflection point in your relationship with your kids, your journey as a father, and move you into a better act 2 as a father. John, any last thoughts before we wrap it up for today?
Well, I have a comical image in my head. I don't know that it'll relate or come across well, but it's almost like if you can look in the mirror and change out your head for whatever, when you said you're a hammer, if the top of your body is a hammer, when you look in the mirror, what would you rather it be? I don't know what to replace that with, so that's up to everybody's creative brain. But if there's a hammer on the top of your body, it might be a good sign it's time to do something different.
Yeah, it's a good visual. What do you need to be for your kids in your context and in the moment?
Don't be a hammerhead.
Don't be a hammerhead. There we go. It's a good way to end. Well, John, as always, appreciate you being here and bringing it. And gentlemen, thank you for being part of the community, for being back for another episode. And as we usually say, we will be back next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, adios. To send us your comments or questions, you can email us at feedback@thenextmanup.com. The theme music is by Jacob Stanifer at Jacob Stanifer Music, and this show is part of the NRT Podcast Network.